Much like the classic video game, life on the Oregon Trail was hard. Many of the settlers who used the Oregon Trail to travel out west faced countless life-threatening variables, from starvation to disease, and even conflicts with neighboring native tribes. And even though some settlers managed to make it through the Oregon Trail with their lives, many of them saw an immeasurable amount of death along the way. Today, we're exploring what life was really like on the Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail was one of the only reasons why frontiersmen and traders were able to travel from the Missouri River to the lush valleys of Oregon and anywhere in between. It was a 2,170-mile trail that spanned from east to west and was considered a large-wheeled wagon route after its establishment in the early 1800s. The Oregon Trail was originally laid out by hunters, trappers, and fur traders who began using the trail to get from point A to point B from 1811 until about 1840. During that time period, the Oregon Trail was only considered to be passable on foot or on horseback. However, around 1836, the first migrant wagon train set out from the town of Independence, Missouri, and made its way to Fort Hall, Idaho. And after that, wagon trails became cleared farther and farther west until the entire Oregon Trail was considered to be passable by large-wheeled wagons. The Oregon Trail, along with all of the many offshoot trails that branched off of it, were used by more than 400,000 farmers, settlers, ranchers, and more. Sadly, the trail wasn't filled with good times, but instead many people lost their lives due to the harsh environment that surrounded the trail. And those who survived certainly had a story to tell. It's important to note that none of the migration that took place on the Oregon Trail would have been possible without a very important historical figure, Sakua. No frontiersman would be the hardened explorer that they became if it hadn't been for the guides who taught them everything that they know. And as far as guides go, none have ever been as famous as Sakua. Many know her as the guide on the famous Lewis and Clark expedition, but she had a very troubling life before she ever became that guide that everyone knows her as. Sakua was born to the Lemhi Shoshone tribe in May 1788. She lived with her tribe until she was around 10 years old, which was when the Lemhi Shoshone tribe was attacked by a group of warriors from the Hidatsa tribe. Sakua was taken captive, and then that is where her story gets a bit hazy, with various different recollections of her life taking place before the famous expedition. Some accounts claim that she was sold to a trader that was named Toussaint Charbonneau. The trader also happened to be married to a Hidatsa woman that was known as Otter Woman. Though he already had a wife, he was keen to marry Sakua because she apparently spoke both Hidatsa and Shoshone. It is believed that he used her as a guide to help him navigate the harsh western landscape as well, which was her first step into becoming the famous guide that helped establish the Oregon Trail. In 1804, two men named Lewis and Clark wandered into the Hidatsa tribe and requested that Charbonneau help them translate and help them chart the territory. Sakua joined them on the expedition, and if it wasn't for her, they would not have been successful in laying out the foreground for the Oregon Trail. One instance where Sakua reportedly saved the expedition was when their boat was traveling downriver with important maps and documents. According to historians, the boat capsized in harsh waters, and all of their work on the expedition began getting carried away by the current. However, Sakua reportedly jumped into the water and made her way over to the riverbank, where she collected as much of their supplies and documents as she could. If it hadn't been for her, there's a very good chance that the Lewis and Clark expedition would have ended right there. Thankfully, that wasn't the case, and the group was able to chart the territory and lay out the groundwork for what would become the Oregon Trail. Now, another key figure in the creation and establishment of what became the harsh Oregon Trail was one that went on to cause quite a few problems for the U.S. government at the time. John C. Fremont was a man of many hats, though he certainly always believed himself to be someone who fought for freedom and justice. He was an American explorer that was born in January 1813. Fremont gained the attention of a politician named Joel R. Poinsett in South Carolina, who pulled strings to get John a teaching position aboard the USS Natchez in 1833. However, it wasn't long after joining that Fremont resigned from the Navy and secured his spot as a U.S. topographical surveyor. He was tasked with charting a route that the Charleston, Louisville, and Cincinnati Railroad could travel. This led to an increase in Fremont's desire for exploration, which eventually saw him traveling out west to help map out the Oregon Trail. Fremont was responsible for a lot of the publications surrounding the Oregon Trail during its early years, and he also worked to maintain proper relationships between the people traveling along the trail and the Native Americans that lived around it. That being said, there are multiple stories that paint Fremont as a less than peaceful frontiersman. One account from 1844 claimed that Fremont, along with the men that he was on the expedition with, ransacked a Native American village that was positioned on the outskirts of the Great Salt Lake. This attack was apparently unprovoked and also unsanctioned by the United States government. During the raid, John C. Fremont and his men burned all of the crops and killed any native that showed any form of resistance. The following year, in 1845, Fremont had his horse stolen while on an expedition in California. He believed that it was a member of the Kalamoth tribe that stole his mouth, and promptly ordered his men to attack a nearby village in response to the theft. Fremont's time in the American frontier didn't end there, though. He eventually became the first presidential candidate for the Republican Party, which had just been established. And though he didn't win the election, he did go on to become the governor of Missouri, as well as being known as one of the first frontiersmen to help establish the Oregon Trail. Now, as mentioned before, life on the Oregon Trail was anything but easy, and everyone who traveled it had the chance to face death on a daily basis. In fact, it was reported that 1 in 10 people who traveled the trail never made it to their destination. In total, experts estimate that between 12,000 and 30,000 lives were lost due to the various hardships that were faced on the Oregon Trail. And if that number doesn't scare you, look at it this way. There were, on average, 20 graves per mile. As far as what caused all of these deaths, there was a multitude of problems that a traveler could face while traversing the Oregon Trail. From simple accidents to injuries or starvation, anything was possible. Not to mention the constant tension between the American settlers and the Native American tribes that surrounded the trail often led to conflicts that cost many men, women, and even children their lives. But even if you didn't die of some heinous injury, there were always the chances of starvation or simply just getting sick and not being able to recover. You need to remember that carrying enough supplies for a large group of people over a journey as vast as the Oregon Trail would have been really hard. And more often than not, everyone on the trail was suffering from dehydration or some form of malnutrition. In other words, the Oregon Trail might have led settlers to a supposedly better life, but by the time they got there, there was a good chance that they were either dead or dying. In fact, one of the most notorious tragic events to occur on the Oregon Trail has become known as the Mormon Handcart tragedy, and it just shows how hard life really was on the trail. The Mormon Handcart tragedy wasn't just one event that occurred on the trail. Instead, it was a whole series of tragic events that led to the deaths of many Mormons that were traveling to the Salt Lake Valley in Utah. You see, the Mormon Church encouraged those who traveled the trail to use handcarts rather than the fully covered wagons that are typically shown in paintings and depictions of settlers. The choice was made due to the cheap cost of the handcart compared to a full wagon. However, this cheap choice would prove to be a costly decision. It was in 1856 that 2 large companies of Mormons using handcarts left Iowa City with the intention of making it to the Salt Lake Valley. According to the reports, the journey started with about 1,000 Mormon settlers, and the number that it ended with was considerably lower. One of the biggest causes of this was the company's timing. You see, when they left Iowa City, they hadn't prepared for the extremely harsh winter that they were going to have to face out on the open plains. And because they were hauling their carts by hand, there wasn't much room for the families to carry supplies or shelter to help them efficiently face the weather. That in itself led to a lot of death and illness, and as the conditions harshened, things only got worse. Historians claim that as their food and ration supplies began to run out, the Mormon settlers resorted to eating the leather from their own belts and shoes to get them through the hard times. As the Mormon pioneers pressed on, more and more of them continued to die due to the conditions. But eventually, all that was left managed to make it to their destination and found safety in Utah. That being said, many who made it to their destination had the scars to show how tough their journey truly was, with many of them suffering from frostbite along the way. That was only a small portion of the hardships faced along the Oregon Trail. But what do you think about life back then? Would you have been brave enough to try to traverse the trail to begin your life out west? Make sure to let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed today's video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel.